In the summer of 1518, a woman began dancing alone in a Strasbourg street with no music, no festival, and no apparent reason. She could not stop. Within a month, she had company, and people were dying at 15 a day. To understand what happened in Strasbourg in 1518, you have to understand the world these people were living in. The Holy Roman Empire was fracturing under the weight of consecutive disasters. Harvests had failed repeatedly across the Rhine Valley. Syphilis was spreading through populations that had no treatment for it. Smallpox, famine, and floods had stacked on top of one another for years. The people of Strasbourg were, by almost any measure, a population at its breaking point. That context matters enormously, because what was about to happen didn't emerge from nowhere. It emerged from desperation, and it would take a shape no one in that city had seen before. In July of 1518, a woman named Frau Troffea, sometimes recorded as Truffa in the historical documents, walked out of her house onto a narrow Strasbourg street and began to dance. There was no music. There was no celebration. She danced silently and feverishly for hours. Then she kept going. Contemporary witnesses, whose accounts are preserved in the Strasbourg city archives, described her as looking tormented rather than joyful, her face drawn, her movements compulsive. By the end of the first day, her feet were bleeding inside her shoes. By the end of the first week, she had barely slept. She did not appear to be choosing this. After 6 days, city authorities intervened, but not in the way you might expect. They didn't restrain her. The physicians they consulted told them this was a case of hot blood, a medical explanation rooted in the Galenic humors theory that dominated European medicine at the time. The prescribed cure was more dancing. The logic held that the afflicted needed to dance the illness out of their system. So the city of Strasbourg hired musicians. They cleared a guild hall, and later the horse market and the grain market. They even brought in professional dancers to keep the afflicted company. They were building infrastructure for a plague they did not yet recognize as one. And then others joined. Not by choice, but because they too fell into the same compulsive, involuntary movement. The Strasbourg City Council logs, which survive in the city's archives, record around 30 people affected by the end of the first week. By the end of the second week, that number had climbed toward 100. At the epidemic's peak, multiple independent contemporary accounts, including records from the city council and chronicles by physician Symphorien Champier, placed the total somewhere between 200 and 400 people dancing simultaneously. These figures come from bureaucratic correspondence, not rumor. The city council was writing about this because it had become a genuine civic emergency. The mortality figures are where the story turns truly grim. The Strasbourg Chronicles report that at the height of the epidemic, people were dying at a rate of roughly 15 per day, though historians note this figure comes from a single chronicle source and should be treated as an approximate rather than a precise count. The causes were what sustained involuntary physical exertion produces: heart attacks, strokes, and exhaustion. These were ordinary townspeople, merchants, housewives, craftsmen, who had been dancing for days without meaningful rest. Some records suggest the afflicted experienced brief collapse-like intervals before rising and resuming, as if compelled. The city that had built venues for them to dance in was now watching them die in those same venues. As the deaths mounted, the city council reversed course entirely. By late August, they banned music. They shuttered the guild halls they had opened. Dancing itself was prohibited throughout the city. The musicians were dismissed. The council then did something that reveals exactly how they understood what they were dealing with. They sent the most severely afflicted on a pilgrimage to the shrine of Saint Vitus. In medieval Catholic tradition, Saint Vitus was both the patron of dancers and the figure invoked for protection against uncontrolled movement. The 1518 episode is sometimes called Saint Vitus's dance in older historical literature, and this is precisely why. The city's solution to a mass physical crisis was a religious one, because in their framework, those were the same thing. The pilgrimage appears to have coincided with the epidemic's end. By September of 1518, the dancing had stopped, not through any single dramatic moment, but gradually, fading from the city council logs the way a fever breaks. Whether the pilgrimage caused the recovery, or whether the epidemic had simply run its course, is not something the historical record can answer. What the record does show is that Strasbourg went from 400 people dancing in its market squares to silence in the space of a few weeks. And Frau Trophia, the woman who started it, disappears from history entirely after the initial accounts. We do not know whether she survived. We do not know her first name or her age. History closes around her like water. This was not an isolated event. Historians have documented a series of similar mass dancing episodes across medieval and early modern Europe, along the Rhine in 1374, in Erfurt in 1237 where contemporary accounts describe children dancing uncontrollably across a bridge, and in smaller outbreaks across the 15th century. Scholars use the term choreomania to describe this broader pattern of epidemic compulsive dancing. The 1518 Strasbourg case is the best documented instance because the city council's record survived intact and because the scale generated multiple independent accounts. But it was not, by the standards of its own era, unprecedented, which raises a question the supernatural and the merely local cannot answer. Why did this keep happening? The oldest explanation, taken seriously by the people living through it, was supernatural, divine punishment, demonic possession, or the active curse of Saint Vitus. This was not ignorance so much as it was the only coherent framework available. It shaped every decision the city council made, from hiring musicians, to give the hot blood an outlet, to organizing the pilgrimage that ultimately ended things. A more modern medical theory, raised in the 20th century, points to ergot, a fungus that grows on rye grain in damp conditions and contains compounds chemically related to LSD. Ergot poisoning, historically called St. Anthony's fire, has been linked to episodes of mass hallucination and convulsion in medieval Europe. However, most historians who have studied the 1518 case specifically treat the ergot theory as insufficient. Ergot poisoning typically produces convulsions and paralysis, not sustained coordinated movement lasting days. The dancing does not fit the ergot profile. The explanation that most contemporary historians find most compelling, and it must be said plainly that this remains a scholarly hypothesis, not a settled diagnosis, is mass psychogenic illness. The case was developed most thoroughly by historian John Waller in his 2008 book A Time to Dance, A Time to Die, which drew directly on the Strasbourg city archives. Waller argues that under conditions of famine, epidemic disease, and existential terror, a population already primed by belief in St. Vitus's curse could enter genuine dissociative states that produced uncontrollable physical movement. The body under extreme psychological pressure can generate symptoms that are entirely real, entirely involuntary, and entirely beyond the conscious control of the person experiencing them. That is not a metaphor. It is documented clinical reality. What keeps mass psychogenic illness from being a dismissive label is that it has modern parallels with medical records attached. In 2011, a cluster of teenagers in Leroy, New York began experiencing involuntary tics and twitching that spread through their school, examined by neurologists, investigated by the CDC, and ultimately classified as a mass psychogenic event. In 1990 in Kosovo, thousands of Albanian schoolchildren reported sudden illness in an outbreak epidemiologists classified the same way. The pattern in each case is consistent: a community under severe stress, a triggering individual, rapid social spread, and genuine involuntary symptoms that no organic cause fully explains. The 1518 Strasbourg case matches that pattern with unusual precision, which is either compelling or unsettling, depending on how you think about it. The physical sites of the dancing plague still exist. The horse market and grain market of 1518 are now part of modern Strasbourg, a thriving French city, seat of the European Parliament, and a UNESCO World Heritage Center. Tourists walk those same squares every day. There is no plaque. There is no memorial. The event that sent the city council into emergency correspondence, that killed dozens of ordinary people through sheer involuntary exertion, has been absorbed entirely into the city's unremarkable surface. 500 years of ordinary life have closed over it. Frau Trofia danced for 6 days before anyone around her joined in. By the time it was over, an entire city had been convulsed by something that began with one woman on one ordinary summer morning. We don't know why she started. We don't know if she knew. We don't know what happened to her afterward. What we do know is that the city of Strasbourg, trying its best with the knowledge it had, made things worse, and that the human body, pushed far enough, can do things that look from the outside like something else entirely. Mass psychogenic illness is the leading explanation. It is not a complete one. Some questions don't close. They just wait. If this story held your attention, subscribing takes 1 second, and it's the only way the algorithm shows you what comes next.